So let me just give you a context so you can decide whether you should believe what I'm going to say. I have developed for work with new platforms. I've been the new platforms guy in this field for about 35 years, starting with dial-up services back when 1200 baud was screaming, to the internet. I did a startup that did some of the first internet games starting in 1993 when Mosaic came out, to mobile 1.0, which is the feature phones, mobile 2.0, the smartphones, and social media. I've done this on both the business and venture side. I've done 3 startups. I participated in 70 financing, so I have spent way too much time with venture capitalists, of which a few over 50% are game related. So they're either games or they touch upon the games field. So you have good reason to believe that I have experience in this area. Whether or not my thoughts are prescient, you'll have to decide after you hear the presentation. So, taking Robert Frost's famous 2 roads diverged in that yellow wood, game entrepreneurs and makers are not, and VCs are not aliens to each other, but they have very different versions of the same reality that they see because they operate on completely different perspectives and for fairly different goals. They see them through different lenses, but this is not, as I say, a blind man and the elephant thing. It's just different rules of the game between trying to make a company or trying to make a game, and for instance, trying to make a return on investment. We are now in an unusual time. Often people are looking for what the next big platform is. Obviously, as you can see by my career, I've basically spent my time chasing after the new bright, shiny object. And in fact, one of the reasons why Tag and I are friends is because he is a younger person who chases after the next bright, shiny object. But we now have a case where there are 3 or 4 new technologies, which will be played, are candidates to be played by hundreds of millions of people. This doesn't mean that all of them will succeed. And what we're offering over here is, if you will, a survey or roadmap so you can see how how game people how the business realities that the game people have to deal with, that is, I assume most of you. By the way, raise your hands. Are any of you investors? Okay, we have several. All right, I'll try not to be too disparaging when we get to the venture side. The other thing is, because we are covering 5 different sectors, all of which are not all one giant thing, we're covering a great deal of territory, and some may be of interest to you personally, and some may be of less interest. I hope that you will be able to apply process and thinking, that you'll have that as a takeaway, if one of the sectors, if there's a 6th sector that you're interested in that I didn't cover over here. So let's start with virtual reality. So I described virtual reality at the venture capital panel yesterday as a giant smoking ruin. And while several of the VCs chose to rebut that, when I asked them how many venture capital investments they were making in VR, the answer was 0 for the next year or 2. If you look at it, the aggregate headset shipments are slowly improving. There's definitely an increase over last year. At under 5 million a year, we are looking at numbers that would be a distant also-ran among consoles, let alone something that's a truly new consumer electronic like Alexa, which we'll discuss later. The reason why I list the unbundled sales is that's the important number for you, because there are actually something like there are over 10 million VR headsets, but many of them are ones that come packaged with a phone or packaged with something else. Those have much lower take rates. The software adoption of them are so much lower that it matters to anyone who's in the business of selling software. The platforms and the manufacturers are not giving up, smoking ruin or no smoking ruin. They actually were very happy that VCs made over 400 investments in VR worldwide in the period 2015 to 2017. But for the platforms like Oculus Rift or HTC, That was market development money that they didn't have to spend. So these guys operate on several year cycles, and they are continuing to spend, and they will continue to spend until it's obvious that VR in its current incarnation is dead, which is one possible outcome, or it becomes obvious that they pushed it through. One of the disturbing indicators for anyone in this field is that content revenues appear to be significantly lagging hardware shipments. So we're not seeing the revenue dollars that attach to content that should be for early adopters. I believe this is because, and despite flashes of content greatness, because there have been some nifty titles out this year, the basic issue I think is we did some of the core propositions were wrong. For example, the whole concept of a headset wrapped around your head is something that only a geeky male engineer could love. There are a number of other issues like that out there that haven't been solved. It's one of the reasons I argue that the two most significant VR platforms in the last 5 years are from Google. Neither are Daydream. They are glasses and they are cardboard because they are simple and you do not have to get a person to do an unnatural act like strapping themselves on and making themselves look like a dork, or excuse me, making themselves look like me or any of the rest of you who are geeks, seeming natural, but certainly not something that an average person is comfortable with. So, from the venture lens, winter has come. If you go down Sand Hill Road, which is the epicenter of venture capital in the US, new investment in consumer VR is approaching zero. You do hear announcements, but they are reinvestments in trying to save companies that have been around together. They're experiencing a classic hangover for something where everyone went and invested in a category and the thesis failed. By the way, I'm not saying that VR will never work. I'm just saying that for the returns these guys had to have, VR was expected to start working in 2016 or 2017, and it's obvious that it hasn't. When we've seen previous failures like this, for instance, in educational technology had this in 2011, where the VCs poured lots of money in and they forgot to figure out how schools actually buy technology. The recovery period is usually between 2 and 5 years. The good news is in recent years it's been 2 to 3 years because apparently with our shortened attention spans, the memory is getting lower. There are a significant number of first wave VR startups that are being supported by 24 months of runway in the hopes that they will get past this trough of disillusionment period. And there is a lot of VR investment flowing to verticals like medical and so on and so forth. But if you are doing a game, and by the way, of the 3 people I see who've asked me about this, I am very sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there are more productive things to do, like banging your head against a brick wall. By the way, for those of you who break through, I hope you don't have any long-term concussion damage, and congratulations. So let's go to AR. We have a very peculiar thing. We have a world of promise, and we have huge problems because Pokemon Go, that 8,000-pound Pokemon in the room, has created a degree of success that separates it from the rest of the field that we've not seen in any game vertical before. The closest we get to it was MMOs in the early 2000s when World of Warcraft had 12 million subscribers and the next highest was 500,000. Pokemon Go at several hundred million, and the next game, next AR game, if you're being generous, is somewhere around several million. If you choose a number in China, you can get a little bit higher. It changes everything. And the other thing is we have actually an even more widely adopted thing in AR, which is Google Maps. If you think about the classical definition of it, Google Maps is the single most successful AR application. So unlike VR, there's evidence that AR can be adopted widely. The platform battle among the majors has been joined. Magic Leap is, of course, going to be absolutely wonderful. Ty would tell us about it, but they'd have to kill us because he has an NDA. There are generally low revenues with the exception of, again, of Pokemon Go. There is relatively modest content development. In fact, you haven't seen that many AR commercial products out there. And the use cases remain to be established, except perhaps for geospatial games. Those of you who were at CES, I wasn't, but several of my scouts reported that AR has gone after the tried and true genre that makes things work, which is porn. And while they haven't worked out the kinks, we'll see what happens over there. Through a venture lens, people are interested in AR. VCs are interested in VR, but they've made relatively low investments. So if you are doing an AR play, you will get a hearing, and VCs are waiting to hear it. So when I surveyed 10 VCs, 3 had made AR investments. 2, unfortunately, were not in games, but they had made AR, and they're willing to listen. One of the reasons, I think, is that is the VR contagion. They've had such damage with VR that because VR and AR are confused with each other, it does suppress, and they're worried about why is this different. So we may need to see strategic investment to jumpstart early stage, sorry, that word should have been early stage content development. And luckily, all the major providers who joined Battle have more money than God. You know, they're Facebook, they're Microsoft. So my guess is that you will see a significant amount of money pouring into content development from the AR players. To the blockchain. So the blockchain often gets confused, and in fact, a lot of the pitches that are out there with the financing vehicle of the ICO versus businesses built of the blockchain. We're having the same level of cynicism. We're a vending machine, except we're based on the blockchain. As evidence of this, Kodak announced that it was going to be doing something with the blockchain, and its stock went up by 44% the moment the announcement came out, and there have been 2 other instances of that. Within games, we're seeing people are trying to claim game genres. So I'm going to, for instance, Funfair is doing this, trying to grab the social casino space. You are going to, there are a lot of, there are several startups that, again, I can't tell you what they are because then they'd kill me, but who are all going after the different genres you've seen normally, whether they be PvP, whether they be, whether they be match 3 games, they're all under development. The real test will be, are they of the blockchain, or are they simply adding blockchain somehow to say that it makes sense? I said this time 3 years ago that the games field includes some of the least qualified people to design games, because game designers had spent all their time doing the input device, that is the joystick or the mouse, the hand-eye interface, and VR required a different interface. For the blockchain, there's very good news. The blockchain is about creating long-term value, creating value in coins and other virtual objects. This is something that the games field knows very well, especially the MMO areas. CCP, which does EVE Online, hired its first economist over 19 years ago. We have also spent a great deal of time trying to learn how to engage people in the long term. We are, as a field, we have a great deal of knowledge to take advantage of the blockchain. And unfortunately, we are going to lose some of our better people to other verticals who say, wait a minute, we need to get people who know how to do this, who don't have the learning curve. There's also the blockchain as guarantor, that is allowing you to authenticate a virtual object, because right now, the internet, as Cory Doctorow points out, is a giant copying machine. And so how do you create value in something that can be hacked or counterfeited? The blockchain stops that, can correct for that, or at least make it a hell of a lot harder to counterfeit. There are several startups working on that. It also allows the retention of value to authenticate virtual, for reselling games like Robot Cash that was just announced. It is both a distribution play and it is a game play. So for the venture side, it's pretty straightforward. This is the first stage of a gold rush. They're staking out claims, as I said, genres, stores and brokers of value, distribution channels, so they see this very similarly. The blockchain is a greater opportunity than ICOs for them, because ICOs are simply a way to raise capital in a hurry. They're also trying to co-opt ICOs. Those of you who spend time in Los Angeles know that most of the cool kids say, who needs to work with a venture capitalist, because anyone who's smart will use an ICO. That is not, I believe, true, but it is true enough that the VCs are nervous, and that's why I say it's an existential threat, which is why they're now starting to try and invest in ICOs to take some of the risk. And then the other important thing is, while the blockchain opportunity in games is very large, it is a small piece of a much larger opportunity. because the blockchain is going to permeate almost every digital service. Let's go on to now the most speculative category, intelligent assistants like Echo and Google Home. So it's a technology that's established. It's in the process of establishing. We've seen this thing in many, many homes. We've actually seen there are a large number of homes that have multiple such devices out there. The platform Game of Thrones remains to be played out. Amazon looks like it's going to be a winner. Who the next winner is going to be is not entirely clear, but right now most people are putting their, Apple is fighting it out with Apple is fighting it out with, I'm blanking for a moment. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. It is, for games, it is a radically different interface, and it is very constrained. You're just dealing with voice, but you are dealing with the second most powerful one of the senses for engaging somebody in entertainment, with visual being the first. I'm hopeful, since I'm old enough to come when text adventures were doing well, that we will see things like that come back. And I think we will almost certainly see those as the first experiments. There are unfortunately very few experiments. The earliest one that I could find was Jagex's, one thing in Jagex's RuneScape, where they did a mystery within it using entirely assisted devices. So we are at blue ocean stage. If you want to basically take an absolutely huge risk with your life because you've seen the future and you must find it, this is the one to go for. By the way, at that level of risk, it means the odds are pretty good you're going to fail, but since you know you're going to succeed, it's the other people who are going to fail. For the VC world, they've dealt with blue oceans before. There's no use case that shows any traction in games. There is no apparent path to revenue, and the platform guys are not interested in figuring out how to get revenues from applications. Amazon wants to be able to promote sales. Google wants to be able to do information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are, however, if you are going to get invested, or if you are going to be an investor, you have to be a true believer. In other words, you have to say, I don't care that there's a there, it's going to be so prevalent that games are going to work, or it's got to be part of your thesis investment. A thesis investment is so that is what venture capitalists call when they say, here's a sector we're doing it. And what that means is that's where they're going to start looking, and then they're going to decide what they really think when the first investments come across the board. It is only going to be earliest stage investment, and that matters. That is seed, probably not even Series A. You may see things that are called super seed. There is some pattern recognition. If you're going into this area, you should look at conversational computing. I've worked with Pullstring for a while, which is an example. There are several others out there. You should see what's worked and hasn't worked for them. Right now, the VCs are looking for proof. What they really want is the platform to say, yes, we're going to back games. Since most of you are actually in the business of building, you have to figure out other proof cases, and whether that's getting the Game of Thrones license or something, or whatever it is, you need to find something that isn't there, because the platforms are going to do whatever the platforms are going to do, and they're more concerned about proving their base case, which is, as I said, Amazon for retail, Google for information. Now to go from the least established to the most established, which is eSports. It's a rapidly establishing sector. It is one that it is actually all but proven that it works as a business. There are any number of consumers. The velocity of money in the over $1 billion has changed hands. So, and it has an uptake rate. It's in the third wave of startup formation. That matters to you. That matters to you guys because it means that some opportunities in esports are already closed out. For example, the ability to make an unbranded league that's going to succeed. ESL succeeded, but Jens Hilgers started that in 1998 or 1999. Now, of course, you've got the very big boys, whether it be the Overwatch League, for which there are $20 million fees, and that's the brand holder being able to compete. There are areas that are getting closed off. So it divides into businesses with wide moats. So even teams, which were invested in 2 or 3 years ago, and I've argued that teams are not a good venture investment but that's my personal opinion. But right now, teams have become incredibly expensive. If you are going to invest, you have to be investing at the $10 to $30 million level, not at the early stage investment. There are a lot of good businesses. So eSports needs to develop the entire infrastructure that professional sports has. So ticket taking, merchandising, fan clubs, and so on and so forth. There are all agencies that are able to do product placement within things. These are all good businesses. They are not necessarily good growth opportunities. In other words, they may not produce venture level returns. And then lastly, we have niches with venture-worthy prospects, which is where, if you're doing a raw startup in esports, you should be playing generally, or the odds are against you, with the exception of mobile, where the use cases for mobile esports have not proven in the way that they have for fixed line, and community, of which there are several interesting plays over there. Now let's go to the good news if you're a latecomer. There's an explosion of partnership opportunities. The big guys are dropping money, whether it's Mountain Dew and Razer, whether it's Intel, whether it's the sports leagues and sports teams themselves. There's a huge amount of money. And there may be too much capital coming in. Why is that a bad thing? There are two things that kill companies. One is too little capital, the other is too much capital. If you look at the history of overfunded game companies, you will see that most of those fail. Okay, for a venture fund, it's a hot sector. I got to get money in. I got to get my esports thing over there. We are now seeing specialist funds, dedicated esports funds, which are all investing mainly in esports. There's professional sports investment, whether it be Premier League soccer owners putting it in, whether it be Major League Baseball and the NFL. They validate the market and the growth opportunity. They confer value because they can tell their fans to watch this. And they distort and perhaps destroy early stage venture, because when Robert Kraft of the New England Patriots buys a team, that's pocket change. $20 million to him is like $20 to you. Well, all right, maybe it's like $200 to you. But the point is, he's playing on a different scale than you do. So one of the issues is there's too much, from the VC point of view, there's absolutely too much capital, because it's just the level of capital being thrown by people who do not want to make, or do not necessarily care about making a return now, matters to them. And the other thing that's happened is, because it's a semi-mature field, people are trying to figure out, when can I make my exits? Because this is a maturing field, and I don't want to fail to sell my company in the right window. So let me go through a few basics that apply to everything. How VCs think. They generally operate on 7 and 10-year time horizons, which is the amount of time that they have to invest in a fund. That doesn't mean from the time they invest in you. So if you get invested in year 4 or year 5, they're thinking a 3-year horizon. So most responsible VCs stop doing new investments after year 3 or year 4. The target they all claim is 10 times return on their capital. They can make a good living on a 2x to 3x range. The ones you hear about in the press are the ones who make insane ones, but the vast part of the field can make a living at 2x or 3x. Being too early or too late is the same thing as being wrong, because you don't capture the sweet point when value can be realized. If you wait to sell too late, as we've seen happen in mobile games, you get diluted. If you try and get too early, the field doesn't develop, as with VR. They're also herd animals. This must be a good idea because the other lemmings are going over the cliff, is a good philosophy to describe to them. And the most important thing to understand tactically is their partnerships. So if you have a junior person in the firm, they're probably, if you run into trouble, that's a bad sign. And you should probably find out if your guy, if it's a large firm, if your guy's the only one who knows the field, then you should worry, because it means he's not going to get any support if you run into trouble. So lastly, up your game. You have to play, I've tried to explain to you how venture capitalists think, because you have to deal with them if you're in the growth business, but you always have to make sure that you are subordinating venture to your game. You have to build the business, so it has to be your game based on your rules, which is your thesis on what you think is going to work, and changing those rules when you get mugged by reality, but not because you think it'll make your venture capitalists happy. The one exception is if you're running out of money, then you're stuck with VC rules because you're desperate. When there's an opportunity that can be exploited only by getting venture capital, you're not desperate. That's a negotiation. But understand, VCs may not say this, but they know that they are service people. They only win if you build a great game company that produces a lot of revenue. Their victory conditions is because you guys have the vision, pull it through and execute it. They're nothing without you guys. Thank you.
What do you mean, what is a blue ocean?
A blue ocean, so it's from Harvard Business School, Harvard Business Review. A red ocean is one that's heavily competed, referring to there's lots of blood in the water. A blue ocean is one where there's nobody else where there's nobody else in there. If it's a Steven Spielberg movie, there's a shark that you'll hear the music and it'll come bite you. Sorry about that. That was a bit of jargon. Thanks for asking.
So if we're talking about investment in a voice assist, one of the voice assistance program, platforms like Alexa or whatnot, are investors only interested in games per se that only work on one of those speakers? Or how about the use of that technology inside of a game?
Well, since two VCs asked me, is the opportunity to play the game through the speaker or is the opportunity to assist the other speaker, they're open to either way. Because in something that is this blue sky, blue ocean, the issue is the smart VCs know they're not smart enough to figure out the answer and they're hoping that you will figure out the answer. So there is not a verdict on that.
Thank you very much,
Thank you all. Thanks, Todd.